Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Saturday morning's Fife Property Show. And today we're going to be discussing a lettings topic and quite an important one, fines for landlords. And we're going to run through our essential tips and guidance to avoid costly penalties. And I think as well, there's a lot more that could be a result of obviously not complying with legislation and having the right things in place. And we're going to cover that as we go throughout today. Things that a lot of landlords maybe aren't aware of. I think today, Jim, being a landlord or a managing agent, it's expected to be a really highly professional and conscientious business, and that's how I treat it as an agent. And education and knowledge is key. And there are severe consequences for ignoring the rules and the legislation. So fines for landlords can run, and I mean into tens of thousands of pounds. But fortunately, with the right preparation, the right knowledge, then they're easier to avoid than the parking tickets and things that you could get quite easily. So you can avoid them if you have the right knowledge or the right people on your side. So nonetheless, even with the most well-meaning landlords, they can pick up fines because they miss maybe deadlines or forgetting about something altogether. Obviously, as a managing agent, I have a system that notifies us and we keep it all on track. If you're a self-managed landlord, you might not have that. Do you know, you might have it just scribbled on a calendar or forget to scribble on that calendar, and that could cost you. So today we are really distilling the details around fines for landlords and the consequences. We're going to cover, firstly, we're going to look at the required certificates that you need to keep things compliant. We're going to look at property licenses and registration. We'll look at identity checks, which kind of falls in it. We'll talk about England as well, because that you've got the right to rent in England, which is different in Scotland. We're going to look at late compliance versus non-compliance. And the final thing we're going to cover today, and I think the most important thing, so listen in for this at the end, is the cost of the fines and the repercussions that can actually be implemented to a landlord. And I think there'll be a lot of home truths there that people might not be aware of. So listen out for that at the end. It is the most important part of today, I think, to listen out for. So whether you have a brilliant managing agent to share the liability with you, or looking after it, or you're managing everything yourself, this is our handy guide for landlords to avoid fines and help them stay penalty free.
Now I think about it, actually, I've never had any fines in all the time that I've actually done anything. And that's 30 years, and I've never had anything at all. I wouldn't. Well, I'm not going to use the word. I'm not going to use the word. We've come close, but through no fault of our own, we've come close because the tenants used it as a leverage to get a council house.
Yeah,
and that's the only reason it's done. But there was nothing wrong. There was nothing to answer to. But by that time, they'd got what they wanted. Because that's all what it was all about. And you know yourself, and in that situation, actually, it's Hawfield I'm talking about. The council immediately took the tenant's side before it was even decided.
I know. And you know
the council took the tenant's side straight away. The council takes the tenant's side every single time.
Do you know? And that was at the beginning of the whole first-year tribunal service and things being available to tenants and things as well. So I mean, I jumped on it and we used it as a learning exercise, and I went the full process. So it was good because I've been through that whole process. I know how it works. I was successful in that process as well. So I used it to my advantage and our advantage because we've got that knowledge now.
Yeah. So Len, tell me, with all this compliance and all this legislation and everything else like that, and licenses and identity checks and everything you've got to do, what are the required certificates that we should be looking for?
So the required certificates you need for a property in Scotland is, I'll just run through them quick before we go on. So your electrical safety, which is your EICR, electrical installation.
What does EICR stand for?
Electrical Installation Condition Report.
Glad you knew that, because I had no idea. I just knew
a lot of people confuse an EIC, which is also, but that's not in the compliance. It has to be an EICR.
Okay.
Gas safety certificate. You also, to list a property, you need an energy performance certificate, as well as giving one to the tenant. You also
We
need,
talked about in EPCs, actually, in energy performance certificates, actually, possibly minimum requirements coming in at some point in time in the future. Apparently, it's supposed to be 2030, but now the Scottish government's kicked it into touch. But the UK government's actually forcing it through on their side, and the English government. So, I mean, to a degree, it's is it really a blessing or a blessing in disguise, or a curse that the fact that our housing legislation is separate from the English housing legislation? I've got a funny feeling, regardless of the draconian legislation that we've got, we still benefit a lot more.
I feel we do.
Yeah, because it's more it's more legislated, it's more bureaucratic. It does cost a lot of time and effort to actually administer it and to follow the guidelines and what the legislation is as well, the actual legislation. But what I feel is we're all playing a level field. We're all playing on a level playing field then. Whereas, if you've not got that in place, then you've got landlords that just want to cut corners. And because there's no legislation on that, then some landlords will be high in their priorities about what they do in certain things. And other landlords are like, yeah, I'm not really particularly bothered because there's no legal requirement to do it. And that's what I think makes a difference. So that's why, to a degree, legislation sometimes benefits the sector in general. And to me, I'm all in favour of it actually. And I hate to say that out loud, but you notice I'm going quiet when I say it, as if I'm telling you a secret. It's public knowledge because it's on a forum that everybody can see. But I think it's good from the point of view, then it starts to force out the landlords that wouldn't be as good as we thought. I had it on the Scottish Property Network the other day where somebody actually went on about, I would kind of think about cutting back on that and cutting back on this. And I just wrote in the message, it's like, you're the type of landlord that we actually don't want you to be a landlord, because you're the type of person that actually gives the landlords a bad name, and it tars and feathers all of us. So if you're going to be like that in the future, I'd probably invite you to leave the sector completely. Obviously got a rapturous applause from everybody, because that's how they think as well. But it's true. It's like you don't want people like that in the sector, because it's like here's the analogy. It's like the double glazing industry. We all know good double glazing fitters, but we all know rogue double glazing agents.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that. It's kind of like the landlords. The same thing applies to us, our industry. The same thing applies to the letting agent industry. The same thing applies to the estate agency industry. Same thing applies to possibly solicitors as well. Some have been, indicted on certain things in the past because they've not been above board in what they're doing. So, it's kind of everything. So it's good from this point of view that there's standardized certification processes in place to make sure everybody is playing on the same field. And then the costs are all similar, because one that cuts back straight away doesn't charge the right rent, and they charge significantly less, and everyone goes, oh, but that person's charging so much less. And I'm like, I'm not surprised. They're not doing this, they're not doing that, and they're not doing this, and they're not doing that. It's like, if I wasn't doing that either, I'd be charging a lot less as well. But we have to recover it.
Trying to stay under the radar.
So there's a benefit to the tenant, which is ultimately the whole reason the legislation's in place. There's also a clear path legislated for a landlord to follow and a letting agent to follow as well. But the key here is, though, and you have to get this message across, is that's why rents go up as well. So it's not a part of a landlord doing it. Did you know, I saw a report the other day, actually. It actually said the rental, it was HMRC. They actually said the income for landlords has actually gone down year on year by about 9 or 12% or something like that. And the sector is actually reduced as well as a result of the draconian legislation that's getting put in place. Now, that puts pressure immediately on the supply for the private rented sector, which is needed definitely just now. But it also puts pressure on landlords because they can't get enough income to cover these types of costs, which are going up and up and up and up. I mean, who knows a Sparkets it charges less than 50 quid an hour? Maybe even 100 quid an hour.
Yeah, it's close to that.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. So, and I remember the day when I first started, the Sparkies were like 20 quid an hour. Now they're 5 times that, and that's only 30 years. that's no inflation, by the way. You know, so when you think about the logic of that, well, when I first started, there was no AICRs. Let's be honest with that. Yeah, we didn't need to do that. I did change everything to trip switches in the houses, and I did get them checked anyway as a natural recourse, but I never got a proper, legal certificate. But you always got it checked off by an electrician, and that was a lot less because there was no legal requirement. So as legislation comes in, there's an opportunity for added value for whoever's got to do that job. And I mean, like, we're going to talk about gas certificates, we're going to talk about electrical certificates, we're going to talk about EPCs, we're going to talk about Legionella certificates, we're going to talk about all these different things.
They've even brought in the lead testing and everything now as well.
Smoke detectors, these sort of things as well. Oh, somebody's got to know, maybe somebody's got to go around now every 2 years or something and check it. And lead testing, for your lead testing for your pipes and everything. It's like, oh my God, there's an endless list of costs. Why on earth would anybody be a landlord if on the rents that some people are expecting to pay, and there's no way you could ever cover your costs with the price of the property you would be renting?
You're absolutely right, though, because I think the more professionalised the sector becomes, it weeds out all these people, these landlords that don't want to have the property up to a certain standard or take care of their tenants and the property the way they should be. And that's what landlord registration initially set out to do. And then these additional legislations and things put in place are geared up to try and do. And certificates are a big part of that. I mean, all rental homes need to have several certificates, as we just kind of briefly run through there. And they have to be in place for the start of the tenancy, and they need to be renewed at various intervals depending on the different certificate. So it's really sensible to have a step-by-step checklist of these certificates that need to be obviously renewed, the schedule for the renewal inspection, and have that in a calendar or whatever. If you're self-managed, or if you have a really good managed agent, they'll have a system that does all that for you. Now, first and foremost,
this is why I say putting money aside.
Yeah.
This is why I say to every landlord, you need to charge as much rent as possible, not over the top, but as much rent as possible, or the market rent at least, because you need to recover that money in order to put it aside to do all these things. I mean, EICRs are every 5 years, but the legislation changes. Therefore, the upgrades have to be even more stringent. So you usually find in 5 years' time, it's not just a case of doing another EICR certificate. It's actually another £1,000 worth of work at the same time to bring it up to the next standard. It's been
a lot of years have been like that. I mean, we done them all in 2017 when it was originally rolled out.
Yeah, and all signed off, and then all of a sudden, when they came around for renewal, it's like that's another £1,500. Sorry, but how is that? And that's a lot of money. That's definitely a lot of money. So when you look at it like that, and then you look at things like you've got here smoke alarms and carbon monoxide detectors must be tested on the day the new tenancy starts, and at least annually after that, with confirmation provided to the tenant. Again, another job that needs to be done. That's a labour cost. It was never there before. So if somebody has to go around and check that, therefore that's about an hour, and then tell the tenant, so the travel and then travel back to the office. There's an hour wasted. That's about £50 an hour to run an office, I would say, at least. So then you're £50 in, and then if you're doing that every single year, there's another £50 on the tenant's rent to cover that.
Yeah.
And then when you divide that, that's about £4.50 or whatever it is every month. So another £4.50 a month on it. If you've got £400, then you're talking about on £400. You're talking it's 1% of the rent. It's gone up by 1% just because of that one thing. It's now required. So then, when you add on electrical safety certificate, must be given to the tenants within 14 days of moving in, and then done every 5 years. And then the upgrade that's maybe required in 5 years' time, which is another £1,000, which is another £200 a year. And then maybe there's £200 a year. Then there's the time to do that. There's another £50 on that as well, and that's 5. So that's 210 a year. Divide that by 12. There's another £17.50 on the rent every month. So we've just established we've got £4, we've got £17.50, we've got £20 on the rent, and then we come to valid gas and safety certificate. I mean, that's always been there. So let's
gas certificate's always done.
Yeah, let's leave that out of the equation because that's always been done. EPC on the property must be renewed every 10 years. So in 10 years' time, you're going to be upgrades.
But you're going to have to upgrade now anyway if they're bringing in minimum EPC banding.
Yeah. So let's look at that. So even if it's £1,000 again in 10 years' time, there's £100 a month. There's about £10 a month. I'm playing with numbers here. There's about 30 quid a month has to go on your rent from now on to cover all these renewal costs. 30 quid a month. If you're £400 for your rent, then you're putting your rent up 7.5%. Now inflation's only 2%, and everybody goes, "Oh, that's terrible." And it's like, but I've just explained, this isn't extra money in the landlord's pocket. This is to pay for all the compliance. It's extra and additional over and above now, and all the new standards that come as a result of that. So that's the bottom line. That's what we have to realise that. Definitely, it's just so logical that you can see all these costs laid right out in front of you. And if the tenant refuses to accept and refuses access for safety checks and the certificate lapses, you must be able to show regular attempts to do the renewals, and if you want to either avoid a fine or serve notice successfully if you ever can't get in. So think about the amount of times then you've got to do another visit. There's another 50 quid. Another visit. There's another 50 quid. There's another visit. Another 50 quid. And then you've got the contractor visiting as well. So they're kind of be paid nothing at that point in time. So you can see how all these costs go up. The next minute you're paying 10% extra in your rent every month because of this.
And I think what tenants maybe sometimes don't realise is that all these additional measures and things that are put in place are to benefit them in the long run. They'll obviously have the property at a better standard, or give them a better standard of living.
Here's another way of saying it. Here's another way of saying this, Richard, though. I don't think the MPs and MSPs and the officials realise there's where the additional cost is.
Yeah. No,
it's a great invite to them to shout out from the rooftops and say, it's absolutely disgusting, all these rents going up and these landlords making so much money. But hold it, I've just proved to you now that this is stuff that we don't know is about to come, and it will come with the upgrades that are required by the legislation as it keeps increasing. Therefore, it's additional costs that a landlord has. It's not extra money in their pocket. 7.5%. Additional costs. I've just proved that over the next 10 years, every single time you have to put 7.5% on your rent now and actually increase it in order to save up for that. So for that right now, 7.5% just on your rent right now to cover that at that time.
Yeah, no, that's a really good way to explain it to people, and I think that you're right. The MPs and people that put this kind of legislation in place don't think about the cost. And the cost it's going to actually have on the landlord and the commercial reality of it, basically.
Yeah. So they will even come to things like the property licenses. What about people with HMOs?
Yeah. So property licenses, I mean, primarily are HMOs, which is a house of multiple occupancy. So, but they also apply to single dwellings in some areas and things differ between local authorities and obviously England and Scotland and things as well. But councils can restrict the numbers wherever they see fit. And there are 3 types of licenses, so we'll go through them here. So there's a mandatory license that applies to all HMOs in the UK with 5 or more people living in the property who are from 2 or more households, and then that's what makes an HMO. Additional licenses is discretionary to individual local authorities and applies to HMOs with 3 or 4 people from 2 or more households. It could get a wee bit complicated. And then you get selective licenses as well, which affects every rental home, and whether it's a single dwelling or HMO, that falls into a particular local authority selecting.
Now, just to say, what we've just discussed now is mainly the English legislation.
English, that's what I was just saying. That's a lot.
So what is it? What is it? The HMO legislation in Scotland?
So the HMO the licensing in Scotland, that is when you've got the 5 or more people living from 2 or more households. That's HMO in Scotland.
Okay, so if I have if I have 3 people and they're all unrelated, that means there has to be an HMO.
Yes.
Okay, because it's more than 2 households.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
But you could have,
and then if I have
4 individuals,
2 brothers, if I have 2 brothers staying there, if I have from the same family. And then if I have a brother, 2 sisters and a brother for another family, that's still okay, is it no?
So say that again.
5 or more. Aye, 5 or more. Aye. If I had 2 brothers and 2 sisters both have separate families, there wouldn't be any requirement, would there? Because they're both related and they're two.
As long as they're related, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But then if I have 3 from one family, 2 from another, then you've got to have HMO.
Yes, and the HMOs are really difficult. Obviously, we don't do HMOs, but I am aware of obviously the rules. So also, what you can have is you could have 4, and like this is because obviously I do stuff in St Andrews, so and we don't have the HMO license, but you could have 4 individuals if they are 2 units as in a relationship, and only 2 of them are on the tenancy agreement. You could do that as well. So there is ways around it slightly.
Okay.
But you can't
so
have obviously.
I mean, a good letting agent really would know that the current licensing zones in your and the zones in the area, and along with up and coming changes that may affect your plans to alter your property you already own or to buy one. But we know that there's St Andrews, for example, is quite draconian towards renewing HMO licenses for areas outside of the town centre.
Yeah,
because they've now realised the huge impact apparently it has on the surrounding neighbours, and they're kind of sick of it, and I didn't blame them. You've no bought into a street at £600,000, in a property to then realise that you've got a student HMO right next door to you,
and you've got like 6 or 8 individuals in there or something,
and then let's be honest, having parties.
Yeah.
Toga parties, and then running out and doing certain things and all the rest of it. All these different things that happen as a natural result of it.
Yeah, St Andrews is a prime example of that, and the residential areas that surround the town centre and things. There's 4 and 5 bedroom properties that do have their HMO licence, and neighbouring properties and things aren't too happy about that. And I could understand it as well. Also within the town centre, I had one recently that I let as just a residential let because the HMO licence had lapsed. Subsequently, they got it renewed, and it's been sold with its obviously with that as the additional advantage. But that's in the town centre and it's different. So yeah, you're right. In the residential areas, and I tend to agree with them. If I lived there, I would feel kind of the same. So Definitely. Anyway, let's go on to identity checks. And also, like, this will cover England as well, because in England they do the right to rent thing as well. So although it's good practice to check,
do you know what?
Everybody.
Do you know what? Before you start with that, Richard,
yeah, go ahead.
And talk about the identity checks. The one thing I see all the time is there seems to be a huge problem with it in England. In London especially, in some of these major cities, it's like for people falsifying identity. I don't think we've ever had it.
I was going to say maybe once I think I had a wee bit there was one where I wasn't too sure, but it's not anything we've ever had to deal with, people portraying themselves as somebody that they're not.
So really what the point I'm making is this really something we need to be ultimately concerned about, or what sort of checks should we be putting in place just to make sure we're covered?
Yeah, I think it's good practice, obviously, to do an identity check and get a copy of people's, whether it's a driver's license or passport or things as well. I mean, in England, you are legally required to confirm a tenant's right to rent and things as well, like I said, but not in Scotland or Wales. That's different. Now, there is a detailed series of checks to prove that everyone is over 18 and living in the property, has a legal right to rent, and for how long. And as I say, this is English law, it's not Scotland. So we might not want to delve into it too much. But I think as we do as part of our referencing, we ask each tenant or adult that's in there for their proper documents, whether it's their driver's license, their passport, proof of their current address. That's all just good practice and referencing.
It's everything you would go to a solicitor with, or you would go to a bank with, in order to open a bank account, in order to open, to buy a house or anything like that. It is, and ideally for me personally, it's your passport and your driver's license. That's the 2 things that ultimately are great, because they can both work as well. Passport just works as photographic ID, but the great thing about a driver's license, is it works as a photographic ID. It works as also proof of address. But if you're using it as one or the other, you can't use it as both.
Yes, so you have to have the passport and
so ultimately, if your photographic ID is your driver's license, then you have to get some sort of thing like a bank statement within 3 months old, a council tax letter within 3 months old, a utility bill within 3 months old. these sort of things that will have your name and current address that you're staying at on that letter itself, and that's the most important thing.
Most household bills are proof of address, apart from a mobile telephone bill. That's not accepted.
Yeah, because that could be just made up with anybody.
Yeah.
Funny enough, though, see when you're in places like Europe, you actually have to show your passport or ID to actually get a mobile phone. They won't. They won't let you. If you want to buy a SIM card or you want to buy a phone at any shop, they insist that they have to see you. They take your ID
Which
to
is
do
not
that.
good practice, to be honest.
That's obviously so you can't deliberately just get fake, to get
burner
SIMs and
phones.
have burner phones and stuff like that. All that. Know that I'm adept with what burner phones is, but I know from all the films and all the programs I've watched, so I'm not into using burner phones, by the way, just so anybody knows that. But that's effectively what it's designed to do abroad, and yet we don't do it in this country. It's like, you want a SIM card? I no bother.
Yeah, you could
I'll
just
sell them. You could buy it in the local supermarket. You could buy loads of them.
Yeah, they're just on the rack at the till when you go to most shops. So yeah, that's quite easy. But yeah, with these documents and like proof of address and things as well, I mean, confirming that these documents look legitimate and have not been tampered with and things as well. They don't look too damaged. And like I say, if there's any supporting paperwork as well. Keeping copies of all of this in a file or on, obviously, if you're doing digital, you've got a digital system where things are kept and scanned into, then that's really good practice to do that. And then obviously, if you've got any further checks to do, if they've got children and things who then turn 18 during the tenancy, you maybe want to check them, because then it's technically another adult living in the property.
Yeah.
So that's good practice as well. The English government takes that very seriously, and obviously identity and things as well. There's fines of up to about £20,000 for anyone not carrying the right to rent checks. Again, like that's England, and up to 5 years in prison for renting to someone who does not have the right to rent in UK. And that's England, but it just shows you 5 years in prison just for not doing a proper check or making sure somebody has the right to rent. And that's just a taster of what we're going to talk about at the end, because here in Scotland as well. With
my question at this point in time, then, with all this legislation in place, is like, who the hell wants to be a landlord at just one property if you've got to do all this? Because we've got more to come, by the way. And it's like, this is what really puts a lot of people off. This is why the mix of landlords in Scotland in particular have gone down, and by about 50,000 in single owner occupier landlords. They've only got one property and two properties, and they've gone up in multiple ownership landlords like myself.
Right. Yeah.
So that's actually gone up, but the single owner landlords have actually started to go down, and it's kind of what I said. I genuinely think the landlord market, or the landlord, landscape is probably the word. The landlord landscape is will start to consolidate over time, and you'll see a lot more bigger landlords coming out of that pot. Maybe with the same stock as the single landlords sell off, but the single landlords, I'll be honest, it's like, why would you then sell to another landlord if you've got a sitting tenant? Just evict a tenant and actually get more money for your property. Because that's ultimately what you've got to think. It's like, you're not there as an obligation to anyone else other than for yourself at that point in time, because it's the government's legislation and all the bureaucracy that's been put on you as a result of that when you first started out. It's all on you now. So you've got all this headache to deal with. You've got a full-time job, or you're maybe retired. It's like, I don't even want another full-time job. So
that's essentially what it is.
I'll evict the tenant. I'm selling the property. Sell it in the open market. You've got a lot more people involved. You've got first-time buyers. You've got downsizers. You've got upsizers. You've got people wanting to relocate to the area. Whereas if you just sell to another landlord, you've only got a landlord. That's it. So you tend to find you'll get a lot less for your property as a result of it.
Yeah, and I've seen quite a lot recently, and it's over the last 12 to 18 months. There is a lot of just single property landlords exiting the market. And there's more investors and landlords with maybe multiple properties. But what they're now doing is they're turning to letting agents and saying, you deal with this for me. There's too much minefield legislation for me to work through. You take care of it. And because that's what I do all day. That's the job.
So here's the reason why they're doing that. They're still making money out of the property, because the property, the appreciation of the property was more important. and then they can't see any other better investment to invest it outside of real estate ownership.
Yeah, property,
It gives that return required. So that's why they continue to do that, and they're quite happy for a letting agent like us to actually manage it for them.
Yeah, and I think through time, because of the amount of legislation and how professionalised the system, the sector's become, I think that, I mean, you've said this before, Jim, they may actually insist at some point in the future that letting agents need to be used to manage property properly.
Mm-hmm.
But then that remains to be seen. I mean, that's just obviously a theory. So, but let's move on and look at obviously late compliance versus non-compliance was one thing we're going to talk about. And sometimes, and you know, the first contact that I have with some landlords and things is that they've discovered they've actually breached the legislation or broken the law unintentionally and aren't sure what to do next. This is quite often something that comes through quite often, and they're often too frightened of maybe the consequences or how to start putting things right. But the problem won't go away, and a lot of people like to maybe bury their head in the sand. But that's when they think, I'm going to need to speak to an agent and see if they could help me. And there are some benefits to facing things head on. And really, I mean, deposit protection failures, I mean, they risk a fine of up to 3 months rent. So 3 months equal to 3 months of your rent on your property if you've not registered your deposit in time. But you stand a better chance of getting maybe a lower penalty if you protect the deposit as soon as you realise, rather than later on. Better late than never, as the saying as it goes, and it is. At least you've then showed that you've understood that you've maybe not complied correctly unknowingly, but now you will. So because a lot of people, when they get to me and I'm like, so where is the deposit? And then it's still in my account. Like, well, it shouldn't be. So anyway, so that's one thing. Better late than never. Given that tenants can claim back up to a year's rent for an unlicensed HMO, the sooner you secure your license after they move in, then the lower the potential penalty. So, I mean, I think that's really, I would be very concerned if somebody was running an HMO and didn't have the license, leaving yourself wide open there. But if the situation and you weren't aware and you had a house of multiple occupancy, I would be very, very quick off the mark to try and get that in place. But then in places like St Andrews, that might never come to fruition because, I mean, if it's a brand new license, you're not going to get that. So please be very conscientious of what you're doing and speak to the right agent. If you ever want to serve notice on your tenants without being automatically invalidated, then you could remove the potential triggers by renewing any lapse certificates first. Do you know, if you want to serve notice, but then you've got I mean, the tenant might think, well, I'm not going to go, and then hold you to task, and then you've got a lot of certificates that are out of date and things as well. You're leaving yourself wide open there to be pulled through a tribunal here in Scotland. So while late compliance may not keep you entirely penalty free, it certainly beats doing nothing at all if you act on it when you do realise. And beyond the potential to lessen the consequences, it removes that nagging future worry that obviously you've got things in place. So I think the moral story is better late than never.
The key ultimately is to make sure you actually demonstrate a clear process of you trying to do something about it.
Yes, and have a record of that.
So if you can't get access or anything like that, like you said, you know, you're going to be covered because at least you could tell they know that you've actually made an attempt to do that. So here's just quickly, because I was printing off, I was a wee bit distracted. I was printing off the registered landlords now. So here's the answer to the questions on the Freedom of Information Act for the Scottish Government as of the June of 2024. There were 179,516 landlords with one property. That's 76% of all registrations now. So that's gone down from 90. Is it 90? There was 3. Was it 3? And was it no? It was 6. It was 4. So it was 6. So it was 5. So 91. It's gone from 91% to 76%. It's all right. I'm looking at the numbers in my head from 2020 when the numbers were put out then. So
but that's quite a sharp drop.
Yeah, it's gone down significantly.
Yeah.
And with 2 properties, it's actually gone to 12% now, rather than actually, I think it was 5% previously. And with 3 properties or more, it's gone from 4% to 12%. See how that's increased and it's consolidated quite a lot. Yeah, interesting. You know, 28,000 registered landlords with 3 or more properties now in Scotland, 29,000 with 2 or more, and 179,000 with 1 property. Well, sorry, with 2 properties, 29,000. So that's a stark difference from where it was before, definitely.
Yeah, and I think we've covered those figures, not maybe in so much depth, but we have touched on them in previous shows. So, if you follow and watch through their playlists, you'll see us talk about that previously and how they
Yeah,
and
sorry,
how
I'm
those
looking at
numbers
it here.
change.
Actually, I was talking rubbish from previously. 2019, it was 228,000 with 1 or more property. With 1 property, sorry, that's 94%. 12,000 had 5% of the registrations, and 1,757 had 3 or more, which is 1% of registrations. So that 1,700 has gone up by almost 26,000 landlords now. Yeah. That's a lot, eh?
And that's in the last, what, 3 years, 4 years?
Well, 2019 to 2024, so about 5 years.
Yeah, okay.
That's a huge difference.
That's a big
And that
difference.
shows you the fact that there is now a lot of, there's a significant amount of professional landlords out there with 3 or more properties who are actually in this as a business.
Yes.
We're no here to, you know, as a registered charity, that, you know, get that out of your head completely.
Mhm.
We are here to take our capital, which would otherwise invest in something else, and actually use it for the benefit of wealth creation through the vehicle of real estate rental. That's what we are here for, and that's where we make our money.
Yeah.
Most landlords will probably not rely on a pension. This will be their pension.
And the benefit and byproduct of that is you're providing housing for a struggling housing market
Of
in
course you are.
Scotland.
Something
Yeah.
the government's not doing.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. So finally, we're going to talk about today is the costs of the actual fines themselves and what could be actually implemented against the landlord if they do not comply. This, I think, a lot of people listening will find very interesting and maybe a wee bit like a bit of home truths, because I don't think people actually realise the repercussions. So poorly managed and non-compliant rental homes are no longer just a headache for tenants. They can carry really severe financial, criminal, and custodial penalties for landlords. Now, these include, I think, first and foremost, paramount, not having a valid gas safety certificate. Now, that could carry a fine of up to £6,000 or 6 months in prison, if and right through to manslaughter and charges if a death occurs in a property due to gas with no gas.
Well, wait till I tell you what happened in the past, right at the end of this. So ask me at the end of this to get, you know, give us the point you're making and give us the bottom line, Jim. Remember, ask me at the end of this, at the end of the actual the show, and I'll tell you exactly what I'm saying, what I mean, and you'll be gobsmacked, honestly.
Yeah, I quite believe we will be, but I think the paramount thing to remember here is gas safety is so important. Not just because you might be fined, you may be put in prison, but you've also put people's lives at risk. Gas is not something to just be brushed under the carpet and not addressed
Corporate
properly.
manslaughter.
Yep, definitely.
Corporate manslaughter, that's viewed exactly the same. You've got corporate manslaughter in the industry. If you do something directly kill someone, it's accidental, but it was you and you alone that did that, and you failed to do something to make sure that was safe, you will get done for corporate manslaughter, and you will more than likely go to jail.
Yeah. In the event of somebody's death, I would think that's very much likely. Also, breaching the Tenant Fees Act or failing to have a valid energy performance certificate. Both of these attract a fine of up to £5,000. You can't obviously charge tenants fees for things like referencing and things now as well. So always keep that in mind.
Some tenants will be going, what? Sorry?
Yeah,
honestly, because there
there'll
is
be
people
people
out
out
there
there
that
to
will
do
do
it.
that. Charge the tenants for referencing.
Referencing fees,
Referencing has been banned for a long time.
Long time,
Referencing fees.
That was a way back, God, just no long after I started, and I'm coming up for about 15 years doing this. So it was a while ago.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
God, time flies, eh?
Yeah.
Flipping heck.
So without a valid electrical certificate, you risk fines of up to £30,000 per offence Although your tenant doesn't have an automatic right to claim unless something's went wrong and someone's been harmed. But there is a big penalty and fine associated with that if it was to happen.
Again, I would argue again that if a tenant if you fail to do that electrical safety check and you get that certificate issued and your tenant isn't in place and your tenant hasn't stopped you and you just failed to do it, then I think that the tenant suffers and possibly dies. I think, again, it should be corporate manslaughter.
It should be, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think
the same thing should apply to things like smoke alarms. If you can't demonstrate you've actually put smoke alarms in, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers, where it's needed, and HMOs, by the way, make sure they're actually certificated every year, because I think they've got to be checked every single year in HMO. Potentially prison sentences and severe in the most severe cases. But then what do you expect? You're toying with somebody's life. You've got responsibility for that, for protecting that person in that property. So if you're renting them a property and giving them a property that is inadequate and unsafe for them, then you should be fined or going to jail. Yeah, definitely. Well, I completely agree with that.
Inadequate provisions for smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, fire extinguishers if you're in an HMO and things, these all carry potentially unlimited fines and even a prison sentence in the most severe cases. So, I mean, that can happen if you've not got those right provisions in place and something happens as a result of not being alerted to the fact of a fire or whatever. So that is something to be aware of.
I tell you what I've seen recently as well. What I've definitely seen recently in the papers, actually people, and actually in Landlord Zone, I think they reported it as well, where the judge awarded a full rent repayment for all that time to the tenant for the landlord's failure to do certain things. Yeah, they actually told the landlord, it's like, we want you to pay back, I think it was more than £20,000 worth of rent because you failed to do all these things when you knew you were meant to be doing them.
That's probably put them to the wall then after that.
They deserve it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. But
I know. It's like, I wouldn't have any pity at all for anybody. It's meant to be doing that and has failed to do that deliberately, knowing that they were meant to do it. You shouldn't be in this industry if that's the type of person you are.
If you're a landlord or agent or whatever, and I think it's very rare that you could turn around and genuinely say you were unaware of the repercussions or the legislation in smoke and fire safety and electrical safety.
Let's look at HMRC. Well, let's look at HMRC and how they view it. It's ignorance of the law is no excuse when it comes to the taxes. That's definitely the case. So ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I think that should apply to this as well, and compliance and legislation for your certifications and everything like that. I definitely think so. HMOs as well, when you look at the non-compliance for HMOs, the license and the health and safety and all the rest of it, I mean, they come with huge fines as well, and could go into tens of thousands of pounds and possible rent repayment orders, like I said,
like you said,
for up to quite a long time. So, and if that all wasn't enough, health and safety failings can lead to personal liability claims from the tenants. So they have a civil case against you as well. So the potential repercussions really do make it worth getting your house in order. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, well, no, you're absolutely right. And I do think, and not just to pitch as an agent here, I think if you're a landlord and you have any doubt in yourself being able to carry that out, then get an agent to do it for you. Or a good agent to do it for you. I think that's probably my advice. To keep yourself right. If you feel like it's going to be too overwhelming, like you say, you've got your own job and things to worry about, then get somebody else to take care of your portfolio or your rental property.
I think that's the case. I always come down to saying, if your property is only making a certain amount and you're having to keep doing it all the time, then you've effectively given yourself another job. I've actually spoke to quite a big commercial landlord. He's got about 45 commercial properties this morning. I haven't spoken to him in years, and I saw his sign on one of the properties in Kirkcaldy. And I gave him a call and I said, how you doing? He says, I'm getting a bit long in the tooth for this now. And I think it was the last time I saw him was about 10, 15 years ago. I spoke to him. And he says, it's about, I'm just like, I've sold off all my residential properties now. And I went, really? Wow. Never knew that. So he sold off all these residential properties. That's private sector leasing. He bought them in. So that's 2000. That's late 2010s. in terms of where that is. So that's about 2008, 2009. It was when he had all these properties. So he's sold them off all now. So that's why you've got a reduction in the amount of properties. But he invested it all in commercial property. But now he's like, oh, I really need to sell this all off now because I'm too long in the tooth. And I'm like, well, why are you not getting an agent to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And why do you know just, have you got kids? Yeah, I've got kids. Well, why are you selling it off? Why do you know just, you've got it in a limited company. Why do you know just put the limited company's shares in trust? You can get up to, if you've got husband and wife, can get up to about 650,000 on a 7-year potentially exempt transfer on a trust and value set up for the children's discretionary trust. And once that's done, you have the option to transfer money to that, which will be taxed at 35%. Or I think it's 39.7% or something like that. Okay. It comes out of the now. But if the payout to the child, because you can't be the beneficiary, by the way, you can be the trustee. The payout to your children, if you're paying out to your children and they're a low rate taxpayer, they can claim the difference back from the taxman. That's how discretionary trusts work. If you're a higher rate taxpayer, obviously you're getting the 39, but you've got to pay the higher rate as well on the income that you're getting. So it gets taxed normally just as your normal rates under your income for your tax, but it takes a huge chunk out of your estate, especially if you've got these implications about, the higher rate tax itself.
Yeah, I think that's the thing as well, and I see it quite often with, like you said, that he was feeling he's a bit long in the tooth, and then they start to sell off their portfolio, whether it's residential or they're commercial, and they've got such a good portfolio there, but they don't know what to do with it once they're not here, and they've not got the right advice or the right people to speak to then have it set up to obviously continue while they're in retirement or even after they're gone, and that's where trusts and things come into play. So if you're in that situation and you think, God, I've got my portfolio, but I'm too old now, I'm going to just break it up and sell it off, then maybe that's not the right thing to do. But people don't have the knowledge or don't have the right people to talk to advise them what to actually do with it in terms of putting it in the trust and having it work for them in different ways and be there for obviously their kids and things to inherit. So that's a really good bit of advice. And if anybody's in that situation, then definitely, if you wanted to touch base, we could point you in the right direction of people to speak to advise you how to do that. Because it happens so often, and like you say, people get long in the tooth and then they sell everything off, and it's really maybe not what they should have done. So it's maybe good that you bumped into him and give him that bit of advice, because he might change his thought process now.
Aye, and it's like, I should be sending him a bill.
Yeah,
I should be. When you think about the logic, I mean, that advice is almost priceless in that situation, because he could have sold all this off and suffered all these capital gains on that, or all the corporation tax he would have to pay on these gains that he's actually made. He's chopping down the tree that bears the fruit for 45 properties or something like that. It's like, that's crazy to do, especially if your kids can actually benefit from that and you've got somebody else running all that stock for you.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to round up. Did you tell us the story about the gas safety? We're going to finish up on that. Was that the one about the fine? We spoke about gas safety certificates and up to £6,000, and then the manslaughter thing.
Yeah, let me talk about this. Right. How many private landlords do you know have actually been fined for anything?
I don't actually know any.
0. Yeah. And that's the case for the people that have hung on. Thank goodness you hung on. Because the reality is, this sounds really scary, but if you just follow the system and do what you're meant to be doing, you'll be fine. And even, I'll be honest, dead honest here, even when I've been around some people's properties and these things haven't been in place, because I do checks on other people's properties when I'm taking tenants sometimes, or when I'm around seeing them, and it's like, even if they're not in place, and this is some of the council, by the way, there is no repercussions. I mean, how many people do you know have been fined? How many people have been jailed? How many people do you know have been actually struck off the register? I don't know anybody that's actually been struck off the register either for landlord registration. They just go, well, go and sort it out in the next 14 days and you'll be fine. It's like, but they've been doing it for 3 years.
Yeah.
Why are you letting them away with that? But it's this light touch approach to everything. Even when it comes to, look at the local authorities are worse for it. They're the ones that are getting people's houses blown up with gas safe certificates, no being in order, and smoke alarms, and people getting killed in their property because they've never got out. And nothing happened to them. There's no corporate manslaughter. Nobody's accountable. They just castigate the local authority in general, and that's about it. They maybe get a bit of compensation, but it's like they're dead. Dead. They're not coming back.
Yeah. It's the end of the line.
And this is why it's so important. And for me, it's a conscious thing. It's like, I don't think I'd be able to live with the thought process about I failed to do something deliberately, knowing I should have done it, and someone died as a consequence or got hurt for it.
Yeah, I think if anybody's got even half a conscience, you would struggle to live with that realization if that was to happen. So the best advice is make sure your property is compliant. If anything, just to be morally correct and looking after people that are in your property, that are your duty care for a tenant as well. It's good practice, and I think if you're going to struggle to kind of have that done properly, get the right person to do it for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there today. Thanks for that, Jim. It's really good to get a lot of insights. I know obviously you've done this for a lot of years and have some good stories to add into that. But anybody wants to ask any questions about what we'll cover today, my contact details are attached to this video. Please feel free to touch base anytime. And until next time, guys, I will see you later.
Bye, Jim.